County Circuit Judge, Judge Dugan, who has now been charged with 2 federal counts in the case where she was essentially helping a violent person here illegally to escape the courtroom. Scooby-Dooed this person out the back door.
She's being charged with 18 U.S.C. 1505 is obstruction of proceedings before departments, agencies, and committees. And 18 U.S. Code 1071 is concealing a person from arrest. These both can go along with it considerable jail time and fines, upwards of as many as 5 years for one of the counts that you could be imprisoned.
And let's remember, she got the guy out the back door, and then he was caught pretty much immediately after.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like she's
kind of go into how
these...
they even caught him was remarkable as well.
So she's facing these charges on not only a failed attempt, but a very short-lived failed attempt.
They went there. They spoke with people at the court. The clerk said, can you please wait to do the arrest until after his case has gone through its hearing? So don't obstruct our state process. Let that play out before. And they agreed. So these agents are there. There's people from ICE. There's Border Patrol. There are FBI agents. And they wait. And then the attorney for this individual goes and tells the judge, there's ICE agents out there.
Yeah, this part is where it turns to the point of absurdity.
She got visibly angry in the courtroom, called the clerk over, and then she went outside and confronted them, visibly angry, many witnesses said, and said, you have to go. She said, do you have a warrant, a judicial warrant? No, I have an administrative warrant, which is what an immigration warrant would be.
Would have, yeah.
And she says, no, you have to have a judicial warrant to do this here. You need to go talk to the chief judge. So they say, okay, they're obliging and everything. They are trying to keep this calm and do this by the book. They go to the chief judge's office. One of the agents that was there, because they were all plain clothes, was not a part of that discussion and was on the other side of the hall. Watched her then go look around for other agents to make sure they're all gone. Goes back in the courtroom, confers with the attorney of this defendant, takes him through, she summons him over, takes him through the jury chamber, and then directs him, and that's all non-public areas, so they can't do an arrest there. Takes him, gets him through a different exit. Then after they talk to the chief judge, and he says, you may make arrests within the public areas. This is fine. They then go back out. They see him going through another door, very Scooby-Doo, as you mentioned, that was not directly behind that courtroom of Judge Dugan. And then they pursue him in a foot chase and end up catching him. And they have all this very matter of minutes. As you said, it wasn't even successful, but she orchestrated this elaborate distraction. Yeah. Go talk to the chief judge.
Didn't we find out also that the people on the other side of the case, I don't know, the lawyers of the people who were potentially, allegedly beaten, including a man and a woman that were beaten by this guy, weren't involved in this, weren't told.
Right. The lawyer for the defendant was talking, having this sidebar with the judge, but the lawyer for the state's attorney, was told none of this, and all of a sudden is like, where's the defendant? And the clerk goes, oh, the judge has informed me that his proceedings have been adjourned for the day. And he's like, well, why didn't you tell me any of this? Yeah. Also, the victims are here, and the victim advocate was there. And still, this judge thought she had the authority, this arrogance, to say, you know what? I don't care about the law anymore. I don't like what the administration is doing with this immigration stuff. I've already told people if they're scared to come in my courtroom, you don't have to come into court. You can come into Zoom. That I am going to subvert the law.
There's a lot of obviously corruption that goes on, but there's obviously the sort of, you don't want to say it, but the Trump derangement syndrome that breaks people down. I've seen a lot of good friends get broken down by this. And look, sometimes I understand it's tough, but if you're a judge, a sitting judge, in Wisconsin or anywhere in this country, you still have a job to do, and you got to do it. And your responsibility as an American isn't to do this.
They do have a lot of authority when it comes to the courtroom and making decisions and interpreting the law. But that doesn't give them the right to take the law into their own hands. This wasn't even some excuse she could come up with that there's an injunction, which we'll talk about those injunctions in the next segment.
Yep, absolutely.
But there's this injunction in place, and so I was concerned he was going to be put on a plane to El Salvador. No, this was a warrant that was valid. Someone who'd already been deported and still violated that and came back, and she ignored it. You can't ignore the law. That's the famous thing from Letitia James, where she said, no one's above the law when going after President Trump. They think that they are above the law, and you know what? You're not, and you can get arrested for that.
My dad, Jay Sekulow, chief counsel for the ACLJ, is joining us right now. Dad, obviously you and the team have been hard at work, but there are some interesting new cases that are coming out of the ACLJ. We wanted to make sure as we head towards the end of this Life and Liberty Drive that we keep everybody updated.
We are representing the state of West Virginia, challenging these district court judges that are issuing nationwide injunctions against the executive order signed by President Trump. Now, the problem is a district court's jurisdiction is supposed to be very narrow, very limited to the locale where they're sitting. That's not the case that has happened now with President Trump. So here's what's going on. There's an emergency stay at the Supreme Court of the United States. We worked on this brief through the weekend and are ready to file it momentarily, hopefully. And it will, in fact, be, I think, the key brief on limiting the jurisdictions of these U.S. district courts that are, instead of issuing their injunction covering, say, the Northern District of New York, they issue an injunction covering the entire country, even though they only sit in the jurisdiction for Northern New York. It has to stop. When we talk about law and order, when we talk about separation of powers, what's the president's authorities, what's the judiciary's? The one thing the judiciary cannot be is a policymaker. But a lot of these judges have taken that element. And the answer to that at the Supreme Court needs to be, you can't do that.
This is the example of the ACLJ hard at work, finding the right avenue, the right representation to go after something that is an issue that I know that our listeners and members at the ACLJ are very, very concerned about, and this happens to be that moment.
This case has huge ramifications. I mean, gigantic ramifications. When you elect a president, they're supposed to be able to work through their executive authorities without a court doing what these courts have been doing, and they've been doing it pretty much without stop. Now, the Supreme Court has got this application. They've asked for a briefing. So this is it's going to move in days here. We have to fight back on this because what you have is an unelected judge somewhere in the country that issue with the stroke of a pen an order to stop administration policy for the entire country. Then you ask yourself, well, why can't they stop that for foreign policy as well? And the answer is, under these judges' interpretation, they have authority to do anything.
When you look at what we're doing on a local level, like we said, we'll talk about, the grandmother who can't hold a Bible study. But on a bigger scale, the ACLJ can still get involved on these really world-changing, if not just America-changing laws that are happening right now as they battle against this administration.
You talk about like the Bible study can't happen in HOA. So what if a court rules against us and issues a nationwide injunction banning Bible studies from happening in neighborhoods? Now, that sounds absurd, but it's the same principle of when these judges don't have jurisdiction, they think they can, without limits, do whatever they want. So the answer has to be no. The way you handle this is not by just speaking and talking about it, which is important. You have to litigate it, and that's why we're honored to be representing West Virginia. This case involving jurisdiction is critical to moving things forward. We have to win this. It may take additional briefing. We'll see how it goes. But like I said, it's moving very, very quick.